With the snowpack peaking 3 weeks early and melting so rapidly with our warm temperatures, let's talk about how stream flow is being impacted. Hi, everybody. My name is Erin Wharton. I'm with the Idaho Snow Survey and the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And today we're going to update you on the snowpack. So today we're looking at the snowpack across the West, and I picked mid-March because the snowpack peaked a little bit early in March, down farther south, and mid-March here in Idaho. And I just want to show you how things ended up. So we ended up having a record low snowpack in both Colorado and Utah. So those were the lowest conditions that they've ever seen in the about 40-year measurement history with the SNOTEL weather stations. Also very low, so below the 10th percentile. In other words, like the 10th in the 10 lowest snowpacks on record were New Mexico, Oregon, and Washington. So two of our neighbors had very low snowpacks. And then below the 30th percentile are the rest of the states. Idaho falls into that category where we didn't have a record low snowpack. We did rebound a little bit in late February and early March with some of the storms that came in. And so we ended up with a very low snowpack, but not record low. So yesterday at Morse Creek Summit, we measured the lowest snowpack on record since measurements began there in 1935. And then on the bottom right, I'm showing you the Boise River Basin. You can see that we peaked a little bit in the 30th percentile, and then you can see that we're already melting pretty rapidly because there isn't very much high elevation area in the Boise Basin. Short term, for the rest of the early April period, we are looking at warmer than normal temperatures to be predicted, but near normal precipitation. So that bodes well that at least we could get rain, and we do need spring rain, especially to make up for some of the snowpack deficits that we have. But one of the issues with rain is that when it falls on snow, it helps accelerate snow melting. So the combination of warm temperatures and probably rain at almost all elevations means that we will continue to see the snowpack rapidly melt. So what are the influence of having a low snowpack and on stream flow? Because really we care about how much water is coming down from the mountains that we can use for agriculture, we can use for recreation, obviously ecological health, fisheries, all those things are really important. So here I'm showing you the impact of a low and a high snowpack year on stream flow at the Oahe near Rome gauge. So on the left, we have a hydrograph, which is just how much water is flowing past a certain point on a river. And then on the right is the snowpack accumulation maps that you guys are familiar with for the Oahe River Basin, with the black line being this year's snowpack. So you can see that a very low snowpack occurred there. It set a new record. And then last year they had not a record-setting snowpack, but they had a well above normal snowpack, and that's kind of that blue line. And so when we look at the influence of how the snowpack melts from a big snowpack to a low snowpack year on the left, you can see the river levels from last year went over to 12,000 cubic feet per second. And so a cubic foot is about the size of a basketball. So you can think of 12,000 basketballs falling through that one point every second. It's a lot of water. And so they got the February peak, and then they had the kind of later season snowpack peak as the rest of the snowpack melted. So that was last year, and that corresponds to this blue line with the bigger snowpack. And then you can see how low the snowpack is this year. And we had a brief little increase. That was actually a December precipitation rain event. And then here is the peak stream flow for the Oahe gauge. It's just a fraction of what we saw last year. And so that's, we probably won't see that level of extreme across the state in terms of low stream flows. But we are going to see much lower peak stream flows compared to, last year. This is just kind of like a idealized peak stream flow graph. So you typically have the peak, and then the water levels slowly taper off from the river. And so because the snowpack's melting earlier, we're seeing this peak shifting earlier. And because it's melting so rapidly, we're going to see this decline much more rapidly this spring than we typically do. Amount of water coming from the snow pelt in the spring really is what provides water for most of irrigation here in Idaho. And when we have it drop off too early and too soon, it forces folks who are using irrigated water to shift to other water sources like storage water in the reservoirs or groundwater and things like that. So this year, we will probably see less water come down the rivers. It'll taper off sooner, and that's probably going to be our bigger strain on water supply this year. And what can make things a little bit better is if we have a cooler, rainy spring. So there is less demand for water. And then we also have more water being supplemented by rainfall. Unfortunately, the spring is predicted overall to be drier and warmer than normal. So right now, I'm not encouraging folks to really count on that, but we could get some rainy spring periods that do help with water demand this spring.